Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome back to the show Raquel Stetcher, who is a film historian and critic. She's a writer for Turner Classic Movies and has contributed articles to the Library of Congress, The Dark Pages, Film Detective, and Cine Suffragette. In 2007, she started the classic film blog Out of the Past, and in 2018, branched out with Kel Movies, a website devoted to new releases. She is a certified critic for Rotten Tomatoes and Cherry Picks and a member of the Online Association of Female Film Critics. As press, Raquel has covered a variety of film festivals, and she is a frequent guest on movie podcasts and hosts her own YouTube channel. And in her free time, tweets about all things film on her Twitter account, X account, I should say, at Raquel Stetcher. Raquel, welcome back. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
For people who haven't seen Bad Lieutenant, or if you haven't seen it in a while, I'll just read a brief synopsis. While investigating a young nun's rape, a corrupt New York City police detective with a serious drug and gambling addiction tries to change his ways and find forgiveness. This was directed by Abel Ferrara, and he co-wrote it with Zoe Lund. It starred, of course, the great and most powerful, especially in this film, Harvey Keitel. You'd seen this just not too long ago for the first time. Is that when we were talking? Is that right, Raquel?
Right. I saw it in September on the Criterion channel, and something about it just didn't vibe with me when I first watched it. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then when you brought it up and I revisited it, I thought, wow, this is even better on the second viewing. And now it's even more memorable. So,
Right.
yeah, so I watched in September, completely forgot about it, and then revisited it now. But ever since then, I've also been exploring the work of Abel Ferrara, and I really enjoy his work, his auteur vision, how he works with kind of the same people over and over again, how he sticks to these themes, and also just how everything has got a little bit of exploitation in it. It's just he's a really interesting filmmaker. So I think on this second viewing, I appreciated more having gotten to know more of the director.
It's one little note about Abel is because his people because I had a couple I think I haven't reviewed any of his films yet, but I think I maybe mentioned him in something, and someone commented, I don't know if this is true or not, claiming that they were a friend of his because I pronounce it I kind of go, because I'm Italian, I don't often try to pronounce things like they would in perhaps Italy, right? So for anyone, if his friend is watching this now, because I say Ferrara but I think people say Ferrara, Abel Ferrara. Not whatever people want to say is totally fine. So I'm not 100% if how he says it, if it's Ferrara or Ferrera. But whatever, maybe Abel can comment and let me know. But his friend this guy was hostile. He's like, I'm gonna tell him how you're saying his name. He's gonna laugh his ass off. So Abel or Abel's
I feel
friend.
like he wouldn't care because he lives in Italy.
Lives there. Yeah,
he's half Italian. I think that's from his father's side, is where the name comes from.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I feel like he wouldn't. I feel like he wouldn't care about that because I'm sure Italian people he talks to probably pronounce it that way.
Oh yeah. Oh, I imagine. And also, as a soccer fan, there was an Italian player with the same last name. And, me watching soccer since I was a kid, and the Italian commentators would always say, Ferrara So maybe I even have it wrong, but anyways,
keep saying it that way. I'll say it the other way, and then we'll have a good mix.
Well, it's funny because I first saw this when I was in high school, and so for some, it's probably maybe sounds odd to say that I just had a sort of immediate understanding with it, and some kind of strange connection to it, even though I'm like this kid who grew up in the suburbs of Toronto in a middle class family. where never knew anyone like the bad lieutenant or was around any kind of violence or anything. But I think for me it's the Catholic, the spiritual parts of it, which is so major in this film,
Mm-hmm.
that I just sort of immediately understood those themes of forgiveness, redemption, and I was already a fan of Scorsese. I mean, this is like a clear must have had some inspiration from Mean Streets. We got Harvey Keitel is the lead. The themes of guilt and redemption. The fear of going to hell or heaven when you die is a part
Mm-hmm.
of Mean Streets. Even some of the way it looks and feels looks a little like Mean Streets. I'm not sure if Abel had that in mind, but I mean, to me, it looks like an influence for me. So I just always took to it, and I've seen it many times, but when I watched it I watched it last week again, and I was like, when did I last see this? It's been a long time since I've seen it. And I remember, sometimes I don't know about you, but if I haven't seen a film for years, I'll remember it, but maybe not remember it in such detail. But every time I see this film, I remember everything about it, every scene, every moment. It just kind of left a real lasting impression on me. But what were some takeaways for you? I mean, what did you see this film as being about?
Well, let me just touch on something you said because I revisited The Virgin Suicides and Girl Interrupted, which I had both seen when they had came out, and I had not seen them in a very long time. And I vividly remember every single scene. Like there were even lines that I could just say out loud before
Oh,
they even
wow.
happened. So
Wow.
it is really interesting, especially when you watch a movie when you're much younger, because I watched those when I was a teenager, how impactful those movies are. Whereas when you're older, sometimes you can watch a movie and then forget you've seen it, kind of like how I first experienced this movie recently and then kind of forgot about it and then revisited it. So there is something really about that experience watching something when you're younger that makes a huge impact. So I think that's really interesting. And
Yeah.
like you were saying, this movie definitely is very deeply rooted in Catholicism, like the exploration of sin and confession, redemption, his sort of, taking the case of the nun who's been raped and trying to almost have that as his salvation. That is just so deeply rooted in the story. But also what I thought was interesting that I kind of came away with, sort of tying into the Catholic aspect of it, is the fact that he's sort of three-faced. He's almost like three individuals living as one person. So kind of like the Trinity, where he's this family man. You see him interacting with his sons, attending his daughter's communion. Then he's got the much younger daughter too and interacting with her.
Right.
Then he's this degenerate sports gambler, who's addicted to baseball. He's a drug addict. He's a sex fiend. And then he has his other life where he's the bad lieutenant. He's the
Right.
lieutenant who, rose in ranks to this level of power in that sphere, but now is kind of almost at the same level as the criminals and what he's doing. So
Yeah.
he's kind of got these three aspects to him, which is just very multi-layered and speaks to the film. And then also Harvey Keitel, the way he performs it, he gives that multi-layered
Oh, yeah.
portrayal of this character. So you can definitely get that from it. So
Yeah.
definitely this is rooted in Catholicism in that sort of sin to salvation
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought of it that way in terms of like, he's living these different lives. And it's true because it's so shocking that in one scene he's with his sons, or like you said, like even at like waking up on his couch and his family are gonna they looked to be about to have breakfast or something. And then like just before that, he was with these like prostitutes,
Yes.
with this like red tinted lighting, and he's drinking and all the drug taking that we see throughout the film. But what's so fascinating to me is that we have this man who is gambling. I mean, what is going on? What's happening throughout the film is that it's the Mets, the New York Mets versus the LA Dodgers during the playoffs in baseball, and he is betting thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on LA to win. And at the beginning of the film, as we see, they're already winning the series 3-0. But he's telling all of his fellow police officers to vote on the Mets, whereas he's voting on the Dodgers. Every time, what we see is that the Mets come back, and they're now winning game after game after game. And these self-destructive impulses he has, it's almost as if, one can interpret it that he has a death wish.
Yes.
I mean, he is putting himself in such deep debt with very dangerous people, and he's warned that they'll kill him. That they'll blow up his house, his friend who says they'll blow up your house with your family in it. They don't care. And so you have to ask yourself, how much of this is an addiction? How much of this is just this guilt he has of doing so many awful things that perhaps he doesn't feel that he deserves to live anymore. And he's trying to save himself before he's going to die. That's something that was kind of floating in my mind. I don't know. Did you see that in his character? Is this a death wish? Is it self-destructive behavior, or what did you think?
Which that in itself is a theme through a lot of Abel Ferrara's movies.
Yeah.
There's a movie that comes after this, which is called The Addiction, which is about drug addiction, but drug addiction is a metaphor, and it's actually a philosophical vampire story. And that is all very much about self-annihilation and how we are drawn to kind of self-destruct.
Right.
And there's also some really great lines about habit, and how habit is something we're trying to relieve ourselves of, but that's the only relief we feel. And that's what we see in the Harvey Keitel character, who doesn't have a name. He's referred to in the credits as like LT. We know him as the Bad Lieutenant, but he's got no name, no real identity. But he's obviously in this self-destructive mode. We see him with his sex addiction, with his drug addiction, and with his gambling addiction, and they're all leading him to really bad decisions.
Yeah.
Like the gambling obviously puts him in danger, but we even see that come to a climax with him just shooting the radio in his car and then turning on the police lights. Like you could tell. Or his addiction to drugs, where there's that murder and there's a dead body in a car, and he finds a bag of coke and he tries to steal it. Like he's really destructive. But then that also leads to that really powerful scene in the church after he's talked to the nun. He's like, why don't you want me to solve this case? Yeah. She's like already forgiven the men who raped her. And he's like, no, like think of the other women, think of, what this means. Like we have to punish them. And then he sees Jesus and he's like, I've done so many bad things. He goes on this rant. So I think he just can't help himself. He's destroying himself. And that's just part of his nature, but he realizes what he's doing.
Yeah.
It's almost inevitable. And just to something else that I thought was interesting that I didn't pick up on the first viewing, that I picked up on this one, is Zoe Lund, who plays the heroin addict who shoots him up, and she has two scenes, and she's the co-writer of this movie. She has a great line about vampires.
Oh, yes.
Kind of going back to that, how vampires draw life from other people, but drug addicts
Yeah.
destroy themselves and just kind of, and that's what we see in the movie is him just
Right.
destroying himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And which is so interesting because, today, because, I guess we're further along with people who have addictions or mental health issues, you would think, oh, if only he had someone to talk to. But I don't even think that enters into his mind. I think he just thinks,
Mm,
I deserve to die and I'm going to die, because he has potential ways of getting out of this because the church is putting out $50,000 reward for capturing these men who raped these nuns. And so he and his friend even says to him, try to pursue getting this guy and getting the reward. And also, you see that other guy who looks like a drug dealer friend of his gives him $30,000. We don't know why he's getting all this money, which he later gives to the guys at the end, which we'll get to. I imagine that guy was maybe trying to help him, like, oh, here's some money
mm.
to like negotiate with these guys or something. And he doesn't do any of that. And on top of that, he does have like access to weapons, like he doesn't even try to fight these guys. All we know is that it's one guy. Whether this guy was like a part of a gang that he's clearly dangerous, but he just allows this to happen. So I took it as that he literally just accepts that he's going to die, and he's trying to, and like you said, he's totally aware of all the terrible things he's done, and he's looking to ultimately save his soul before that happens. I mean, that's pretty much how I saw it. I don't know if you saw that any differently, but
No, I agree. And that goes back to kind of the Catholic guilt. Like, I'm a sinner, I deserve
yeah,
this.
exactly. Yeah,
And the aspect of confession, which it culminates in that scene with the vision of Jesus, and he's kind of like, I'm doing all these bad things. This is
yeah,
terrible. How do I find salvation? Sort of. So no, there's really nothing that he's doing that is helping himself, even though we see in some instances that there is an escape. Like he could just focus on his family. He could just maybe do a little better at his job. He
right,
can kind of disconnect from this world, but he doesn't. He just
right.
keeps going deeper and deeper.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, his choices are really, really compelling, and I can't help but wonder for people who maybe either don't understand the way Catholics look at this. I wonder if people can grasp some of the themes of redemption and forgiveness. I mean, me, because I mean, I would consider myself now agnostic, but I was brought up Catholic, so I totally understand where, like, I think that's why I understood it immediately as a
Mm-hmm.
teenager. But I mean, for yourself, I don't know if you happen to be religious, or if you were you brought up within any faith in particular.
Yeah, I was brought up Protestant,
Okay,
so kind of not in the same sphere as Catholicism, but I was brought up very religious. I've been agnostic for many years, but even whether you have a religious background or not, the concept of good and evil, what you should and shouldn't do,
right,
obviously, it's very clear to anyone watching this. His addiction to gambling, his sex addiction,
yeah,
because we see those scenes with him and the prostitutes or the two young women in the car. We realize that he's got a serious problem. So it almost doesn't matter what level of morality you have or what your ideas are or even what your religious background is. You realize that he needs something to save him because
yes,
he's going down in this downward spiral
yeah,
that's going to lead to his demise, which it does. We kind of expect that, but also because you have Harvey Keitel delivering such a powerful
oh yeah,
performance that this multi-layered.
it's
He's
phenomenal.
sympathetic.
Yeah,
It's not that just he's a bad lieutenant and he's doing these bad things and he's got no redemptive qualities. There's something there. There's something deeper in him that Harvey Keitel is kind of emitting in his performance that makes us feel bad for him
Right.
and kind of want us to see him not continue doing these things. Yet it's also kind of like watching a train wreck where we're fascinated how he's just evolving into deeper and deeper into these other addictions that he's part of. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, because I think some people have maybe different ideas about redemption. They may think like, well, if you're trying to redeem yourself, you should do a lot of things in order to
Mm-hmm.
have the right to be redeemed. But because I was listening to another podcast, and one of the panelists felt that it wasn't really about redemption because, well, what did he ultimately do to deserve to be redeemed? But again, from a Catholic point of view, it's if you acknowledge and feel that what you did is terrible and you ask for forgiveness, then you are forgiven. That
Mm-hmm.
is very much what that faith believes, and that's what we see happens. I mean, he sees it, he acknowledges it. He's, again, like the scene you mentioned in the church, like he screams out loud, "I've done so many bad things," and he asks Jesus for it plays kind of darkly comedic because he's this vision of Christ and he kisses his feet and asks for forgiveness. And then it's just this woman there looking at him like, you're insane. So, for anyone watching, if anyone sort of doesn't maybe quite see that, I just kind of I thought it would be important to, address something like that. But the film, I remember watching this with my friend when I was young, and he, I would consider that I have sort of a dark sense of humor, and my friend had a really dark sense of humor, and he would be watching this film and laughing himself
Mm.
hysterically. And watching it again, I can see some of the dark. It does have some dark sense of humor at certain points, like the moment you mentioned earlier where where he's driving in the car and then he finds out that LA loses and he shoots the stereo and then just so he has the right to scream and yell, he puts the siren on and he's driving through the streets, and even when he finds the bag of cocaine. Actually, I never remembered that until the last viewing, in that crime scene, and he tries to take it and then he drops it and then he just makes he's like, "Oh, did anyone
Oh, bag
notice
it up.
that?" And then of course like it does, and apparently Abel Ferrara apparently initially meant it to be funnier, which
Yeah,
I
I
was
did
like, I
read that.
could
He did mean it
kind
to
of,
be more of a
yeah,
comedy. Yeah.
yeah,
Which
yeah,
if he had cast Christopher Walken, who
right,
was his regular, him and Willem Dafoe appear in many of his movies. If he had maybe put Christopher Walken in it and it had gone in a different direction, it could have definitely been more of a comedy. But Harvey Keitel kind of emits almost. I mean, Christopher Walken did many serious roles, but
yeah,
I feel like Harvey Keitel is a bit different, and because of his performance, it definitely didn't come off as a comedy. Although you're
no,
right, there are some definite comedic elements, especially that one. Also, even the scene with the two girls, it's meant to make you
right,
uncomfortable. How it's going, and it's also a little ridiculous, like what
yeah,
he's doing. So there is some comedic elements, and I do feel that one of the flaws of this movie is maybe the fact that there is a lack of him showing a desire for salvation or redemption, although you have that with the scenes at the church. But there could have been more. There could have been more depiction of him maybe feeling guilty and going back to his family and trying to make amends for not maybe being around for several days because he's high on heroin in this woman's apartment. Like
right,
there is a lack of that. However, I think if somebody really understood Catholic guilt,
right,
that would make sense. But somebody who maybe doesn't would have wanted to see a little more.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right about that because this what the seeing what happens to this nun. I mean, you even see him at go to the hospital as they're examining her, and he is watching. and then he overhears her saying that, that she has forgiven these boys,
Mm-hmm.
and he even says to her, how can you forgive them for what they did? And here's a guy who has done so many horrific things, and as we saw with
Two
those,
women too.
yeah, exactly, like those women that he pulls over. We don't have to go into detail about what he does, but that's an assault, right? Like, it is a sexual
Right.
assault. That he didn't physically harm them or anything, but it's still,
It's psychological.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so he has done these awful, awful things, and yet and yet this has disturbed him. That
Mm-hmm.
these men have raped these nuns. But on the flip side, the nun, I think, inspires him to forgive them himself, or to maybe even try to forgive himself for what all the bad things he's done. Because as we see, he goes and this money he has, he gives it to them and puts them on a bus and tells them never to return. And
Yes.
which sounds like a strange thing to do with criminals, and they
While they're
obviously,
handcuffed to each other.
yeah, exactly, and they clearly deserve punishment. But I think he sees himself in them, and I think that's part of the reason why he's
Um,
hitting them, and he's like, putting the gun to their head, and
like, don't
tearing
become like
into
me.
them. Yeah, I think so. I think so, in his own way.
Mm-hmm.
In
That's
his
a good
own,
observation. I
yeah,
hadn't thought of that, but definitely he's like, you have a chance to save yourself.
right.
Here it is. Realize that you did something really bad. I'm putting you on a bus going somewhere else. Here's the money. Start a new life. Start over.
Yeah,
It's too late for me. Which
I
I
think
hadn't
so.
thought of, but that's spot
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I think that is what he's getting at, because I think he's thinking, and you saw this in a different way in the addiction, where it's like, he felt that, like, addiction spreads. It's, you do it
Right.
with others, then they start to do it, and which is, of course, the people becoming vampires is a metaphor for that
Right.
addiction kind of spreading. And I think, in a way, he is spreading some kind of goodness onto them, because now
Mm.
they obviously are terrible, but maybe they will now help someone else who is doing awful things.
Mm-hmm.
So in its own kind of warped way, it's sort of it makes sense that the nun sort of inspired him, and to forgive these people like she's doing, and that kind of helps him look inward. I think,
Yeah, and you can see that he still wants to punish them,
yeah,
but he knows he has to set them free and
yeah,
let them kind of redeem themselves.
yes,
And yeah, and especially with the addiction, the movie from 1995, that is very much about how people are seduced into addiction.
yes,
But with Bad Lieutenant, he's fully into his addiction. He's
yes,
not been seduced into it. He's at the late stage of it,
yeah,
where he's addicted to multiple drugs. And I think the only way you can see sort of a seduction is when he goes to the woman's apartment and does the heroin, and she's kind
right,
of bringing it to him. But other than that, he's fully into it. And
yeah,
almost, I think that this movie, watching it with addiction kind of back to back, they complement each other
yeah. Good point.
because they're two separate angles of addiction. One is how you're lured into it and how it depletes you, and then the other is what it's like when you're completely far gone and you're just self-destructing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And he did another film, not just I think it came out in 2019. I think it's with Willem Dafoe, called
Tommaso?
Tommaso. Yeah.
Yeah,
With
and where it's like Willem Dafoe is essentially playing Abel Ferrara but sober.
Yes, exactly. So it's sort of like, it's you're I think I never thought of it that way, but yeah, they can almost be a trilogy about the different,
Yeah,
cycles of addiction. And of course, in Tommaso, it's about how do you stay sober,
right,
once
right.
you're sober, the struggles of staying that way. but I only saw that last year because about a year ago, well, my friend Mike White on the Projection Booth podcast, he got to interview him, and then I listened.
Oh,
Yeah, I listened. It was great. I listened to the interview, and then I thought, I've always loved Bad Lieutenant. I also loved Dangerous Game. Did you ever see which is
okay. I haven't seen that one yet.
yeah,
No.
that's the one he did with Madonna
Oh,
and
okay.
Harvey Keitel, which for some reason is now called Snake Eyes. I don't know why
Oh,
I don't know why the title randomly changed almost 30 years
oh,
later. But that is also a fantastic movie. I highly actually Madonna's great in it. I know
okay.
she gets a lot of criticism for her acting, which but not to get into that, but in this film, she's so good in it. But I was like, I haven't seen a lot of his films, and then I was like, okay, and I watched, one after another. And speaking of Zoe Lund, who was the co-writer of this film, she was in one of his early films called Miss 45,
Right.
which is I don't, have you had a chance to see that?
I haven't. It
Really
sounds quite
good.
intense. That's like
Yeah.
like rape, revenge,
Yes.
exploitation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another one I've been meaning to review, but she died tragically. I mean, this is a film
Yes.
about addiction. And she had struggles with addiction herself, and she died.
And
And
she actually shoots
yeah,
up heroin
yes,
in the
yes,
movie. That is real, and
yeah,
that's part of the controversy when this came out. Is its brutal depiction of violence,
yeah,
about sex, and in particular the drugs.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all. I don't think when we see Harvey shooting up that's real, but I think when it's
No.
her, it's
Yeah.
real.
Yes.
And it's tragically she was clearly a talented writer, talented
Mm-hmm.
actor, really distinctive features too, like really beautiful woman, and
Yeah.
had a really unique face, and it's so unfortunate that she passed away. But you're right. I mean, this film, I read that like Blockbuster wouldn't release it,
Oh yeah,
unless
I got an NC-17
yeah,
rating, which actually kind of speaks to Abel Ferrara as a filmmaker, that he wasn't scared to go there. Like
right,
he knew that this could be a death knell for the movie at the box office, because
yes,
it at the time NC-17 meant that you had a very limited run, and a lot of people wouldn't see it because that was a branding. Like
right,
when Showgirls came out, I believe it had that NC-17 rating as well, and that was a huge conversation in the 90s about that particular rating being bad for movies, and filmmakers wanting to avoid that. But Abel Ferrara was like, "Yeah, let's go for it. I don't care." And the
yeah,
strength here is you have the Harvey Keitel delivering such
yeah,
a powerful performance that that on its own
yeah.
helped it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, and he also admitted not too long ago that he was on drugs while there. I mean,
Yes, I
I
did
shouldn't
read
laugh at
that.
that. I shouldn't laugh, but that
And there's
while he
also
was,
like
yeah,
controversy about the author of this
I read that.
story.
I read
Yeah,
that.
whether, because Zoe Lund herself in interviews said this was my script, I wrote the whole
Yeah.
thing. Abel Ferrara wasn't a writer, although after Zoe Lund passed away in '97, Abel Ferrara wrote his own scripts. Like he eventually became a writer, but they're both billed in Bad Lieutenant as the screenwriters. She felt strongly that it should have just been her name. Somebody else came in and said, no, he wrote the whole script.
Yes.
Neither of them wrote it. So I think it's interesting. It is very much an Abel Ferrara movie because you have those themes of, the Catholic Church, the sort of this objectification of women, the whole thing about self-destruction and addiction. These are all things that you see in many of his movies.
Yes.
But there's
Yes.
also like extra layers and almost like this poetry to the film that's probably where Zoe Lund comes in, especially
Mm.
that beautiful line, the vampire line that she
Oh
delivers
yeah.
about
Yeah.
addiction.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is maybe a merging of both of them, but it's hard to tell how much to credit either.
It is really hard to tell, and because it's if you know his previous films, it's so him, that it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
believe that he didn't co-write it or write it, or we don't know. His other films, the writer was always credited as someone named Nicholas St. John, and when you Google Nicholas St. John, there is nothing that comes up about this person, and people think it's an alias and it's him.
Oh, I was wondering about that
Yeah,
because I did look him up and there was really not
there's
much
nothing. Yeah,
information. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, I think he's always been writing, a lot of
Oh,
these.
okay. That
But
makes sense because he puts
yeah,
himself in a lot of these
yes,
movies. And the fact, like you had mentioned earlier, about him being in the throes of addiction himself. So it kind of makes sense that also he grew up Catholic. There's a lot
yeah.
of things that have like a autobiographical tie to him. So it makes
Yeah.
sense that he's the author of a lot of these movies.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, these kind of themes in this film run throughout, and I think
Right.
this one is just to me one of the more power. I mean, they're all really really good. I like some more than others, but this stands out. Really as a favorite to me. And I mean, the style. It's so interesting. You look at this film, and you would think this is something that would have came out in the '70s.
Yeah.
Even
Because
though
it's got that exploitation
yeah,
vibe. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. But he brings it to an even rougher, grittier
Mm-hmm.
place. Like I don't even think he could have got this released by a major studio in the '70s and the new Hollywood movement. I think even then they would have given it an NC-17 or an X rating, as
Right.
but it's so gritty, and it has a sort of documentary feel to it, because as I read,
Yes.
they didn't get permits, because sometimes I'm watching, I'm like, are those people like background performers often? I mean, because it just everything feels like they just caught it, by
Right.
in a good way. And when he is in the car with the guys at the end, and it's a POV of him, from their perspective, of him putting the gun to their head, which is I think what they use for the poster. You see people like in the background, they're looking through like, what the hell's going on? And it doesn't feel like someone said, "Oh, react that way because it's a guy with a gun." I think they just didn't care. And I don't know if this is true, but I heard that at the end, and I wondered about this, when he gets shot and the camera
Oh,
lingers
yeah.
on him, and then you see all these people looking like, "Hey, what the?" And I wondered, I'm like, okay, well, they must have got performers to do that. But what I heard was apparently it was all real, and Abel apparently just went around while they were shooting and saying, "Hey, I think someone got shot in that car."
Oh, wow.
so
Oh,
they
wow.
so I would imagine whatever they did, they had some kind of special effect to get blood splatter so that people
Yeah.
would be like, "What the hell happened here?" But that's ballsy.
I thought of that when I had seen this movie again, and I was paying close attention to the scene where he has the two rapists, they're handcuffed together and he's dragging them to Port Authority. And I was paying attention to this because I had visited Port Authority in 1992 in New York City. So I was just kind of like, oh, what do I remember from this era? But he's dragging them, they're handcuffed together. He's behind them with a gun to him. And
Yeah.
there's a cop opening the door for them behind them. And I thought for a second, wait, is he bringing them to the cops? And the cop is involved? Like, no, this is a bystander. This is a cop who just doesn't know what's happening. It
Yeah.
was nice and just opened the door for him, completely not
They had
realizing what's
guts.
going on, but
Yeah.
also makes sense in the story because he's doing it kind of on the sly. He's trying to hide the fact that he has them handcuffed and he's, dragging them against their will.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I can't help but wonder if, because Abel, when Abel admitted that he was on drugs during the filming, he said the director of this film needed to be on drugs, and I can't help but wonder if because look at all this stuff they did, no permits, people
I
would
guess that
like,
gives it the realness that the
yeah,
movie conveys
yeah,
about how just dark the situation is, because it's
yeah,
just
oh yeah,
from an authentic perspective. And if you have these two authors who are both drug addicts writing a story and projecting it about a drug addict, then it just adds that realness.
yeah. Oh no, it everything feels so real. And,
It's very raw.
oh God, yeah. Yeah. No, it's so well done. But a couple of other things I just wanted to mention was that uh, early in the film, we find out that, okay, then he must be Catholic because you see him at this communion for his daughter, and he also it spoke to me that he clearly kind of is apathetic towards his faith, or he's wrestling with his faith, because when they're talking about the fact that there's $50,000 up for grabs for anyone who finds these guys from the Catholic Church, he's critical of that. And then one of his fellow police officers says, hey, you should have respect. Aren't you a Catholic? And I love the way Keitel said this. He says, I'm a Catholic. And he both questions it and clarifies that it's true. And the camera just lingers on him as he's chewing gum. And to me, it just, in the way he said it, in the simplicity of just that one line, clearly is saying that this guy is someone who is wrestling with these themes. Right. Was that your impression of that scene?
Well, I think in general, the fact that he's Catholic sort of lingers behind him.
Right.
In a way, it kind of follows him, and he really merges with the scene at the church with the nun and then with the figure of Jesus. But I was thinking of that scene where he's collecting the $30,000 in that really kind of elaborate box.
Yeah.
And he's sitting on the sofa, and you can tell he's sort of either withdrawing or he's high as a kite. He's very restless. And he's sitting next to the older Hispanic lady.
Oh, I love that.
And there's a blanket with Jesus's image and the halo around him behind them.
Yeah.
And she gives him something, and he kisses her on the cheek. And it almost looks like beads. I don't know if you knew what they actually were. I thought
the rosary. It's a rosary.
Oh, okay. I thought it was something Catholic, because she kind of felt pity. She's like, I could tell you're a good person.
Yeah.
She says it to him in Spanish, and she gives him something, and he feels quite strongly attached to it. And I think maybe at that moment, that Catholic background kind of comes back into him. And then I think it's followed later by the scene at the church, and then him going to find the two men who raped the nun. So that, I think, is a turning point. But you're right, like, he's kind of disconnected from it.
Yeah.
And then but it's lingering behind him, but then it comes to fruition towards the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that scene because it's one of the few times you see him ever kind to anyone.
Yes.
And he even says to that woman, he's like, Dodgers are going to win, and then she's like, I know. and then he kisses her cheek, and it's almost
a tender moment.
It really is. And it's almost as if, she had some kind of premonition about him or something, or that. And the kiss, and giving the rosary, it's almost like last rites, it's almost some kind of premonition. Yeah, in metaphorically speaking, it's I think you're right. It's like, he's distant from his faith, but then it's coming back, and it's almost like the spirit of Christ is there in that room. Right. It's interesting because there's no translation of what she's saying, but is that what she?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Yeah. No, she was saying, like, you're a good person. I want to give you this. I don't exactly remember the exact lines, but she says it in Spanish, and I understood it. But I thought it was interesting that there's no subtitles in English translating the Spanish to English. Which, sometimes happens in movies, and you wonder, what's the purpose of that? Are they purposely trying to hide the language, or is there an understanding that you will understand what they're saying based off of the context clues of, facial expressions and, what is actually happening in the scene?
Yeah.
Because you can tell, like, you don't even need the understanding of the Spanish to know that she's being tender towards him.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. I think when filmmakers are doing that, I mean, I guess everybody, when they don't have the subtitles, I suppose people do it for different reasons. But I think, like what you said, I think he's trying to make you kind of figure out
what,
because it's a mysterious scene, but he he gives you enough sort of suggestions in order for you to sort
Mm-hmm.
of fill in your own blanks. But I mean, those apartments, even when he goes and finds those two guys, they're in this like really run down place. These are
Yes.
not sets, these are just really like, dirty, grungy, broken down uh buildings. I mean, just even the locations in this film are, so perfectly
And you know those
utilized.
are real apartments. Like
Oh,
that's
for
what
sure.
Ferrara
Yeah.
did. He would just find real places
Yeah.
and shoot in them, which adds to that realism, that rawness,
Yeah.
because these are really dingy, gross places. And when he's chasing somebody up the stairs, up the walk up, and then he eventually gets drugs from the guy.
Oh,
That
yeah.
also is a very just like that's a really rundown place. He's just in a really bad neighborhood, obviously dealing with drug dealers in the situation, but that adds to the realness. This is not a set.
Yeah. No set. There's no, and there was apparently a lot of improv done, and
Oh, okay.
not that people, it's always, this is always something that gets sort of like misinterpreted with improv. Like, sometimes people think, oh, if something is improvised, that mean they like made it up. But it's not so much. I don't know exactly what they did, but it's not so much like, oh, we're just gonna roll the camera and wing something. It's like, often it's like structured. The scene is
Right.
still written. They just maybe don't have exact lines. But there
Mm-hmm.
were a few times where I thought, oh, I wonder if that is improvised. Like, for example, when he pulls the two women over, every now and then, what the one young woman is looking at the other one, and then Harvey was saying, "Don't look at her, look at me," and it was so spontaneous that I thought, I wonder if that was actually even written. I mean, you can't tell because the acting is so good, and it doesn't matter. It's not like you can really spot, such a thing all the time.
Well, I think that the idea of improvisation in the scene with the two girls in the car, I think that makes sense because that scene goes on for quite a long time. And the girls are in this internal debate of, you know, he's going to get them in trouble because they don't have their tail lights on. They're young. This is somebody else's car. This is the father's car, and they don't have their licenses. They could get in trouble, jail time, and they can get in trouble with the father,
Yeah,
or they could give into this pop's sexual proclivities, who he really wants them to perform some sexual acts for them. And it goes on, and there's lots of like little elements. The conversation, he keeps pushing, he keeps repeating himself, trying to get them to do things. So I can see some improvisation, like maybe there's a general direction there, but really they're playing off each other. How can these two women delay what's about to happen or avoid it, and how can he get them to do something? So I could
right.
definitely see that being improvised. And then also I read that Harvey Keitel was fully in character through the whole production,
Yeah,
just kind of living this character. So I could see him coming up with some lines or some things, but as you said, within the structure of the scene.
yeah, and that's the scene that, in order to get it released on video, the R rating was the scene that they cut.
Oh,
Uh,
which I'm
uh
surprised that it wasn't the prostitution scene that shows up about 10 minutes into the movie with full frontal nudity of
yes,
one of the prostitutes, but then also Harvey Keitel,
yeah,
fully nude, which
yeah.
we see again in the piano. This was his era of nudity.
Leave it to Harvey. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about this film?
Well, I think it's interesting to watch it with three perspectives. Like to watch it as sort of this, like you said, it's very, very similar to Mean Streets. It's kind of got this Martin Scorsese vibe. Also, once you get to know Abel Ferrara as a filmmaker, it's almost a different experience watching this and connecting it with his other films and seeing it as part of his canon. So I think that's maybe another triple nature of this movie, is the fact
Mm,
that you can kind of watch it different ways.
yeah. No, well said. Yeah, no, he's certainly a filmmaker that's well worth exploring. Like I really have to do review more of his films. This is the first one I'm doing, but like I said last year, I really sort of did it. I haven't seen every single one of his films, but I've now seen most of them, and they are
Hmm.
really, a lot of them are really fascinating. I know there are a couple of books on his films that I should check out. He's not someone sort of that is discussed as much that as maybe he should. I'm not
True.
sure why.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a wonderful filmmaker, and this is on the Criterion Channel. If people want to see it, so you could check it out there.
And The Addiction is also on there.
Oh
So
yeah,
if
that's
anyone
great.
wants to pair them,
Yeah,
that's a very nice double bill.
yeah, oh, completely. Yeah, that's really really good movie as well. Um, Great. Well, fantastic. Well, Raquel, thanks so much for coming on again. If people want to follow you on social media or check out your work, where is the best place for them to go?
Well, I have a portfolio site, raquelstetcher.com, easy to remember. And that has links to my blog, Out of the Past, where I talk about classic movies, and Kel Movies, which is more about indie filmmaking, foreign film, and other types of cinema that's more recent. And then I also have links to my writing for Turner Classic Movies and my script work and podcast appearances, and also the videos that I've done with you.
Great, fantastic. Well, I'll leave the links in the description box below for where you can follow Raquel on social media and check out her work. Raquel, thanks again, and
Thank
come again.
you.
Let's do it again down the road.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also, click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching and thank you again. And I will see you in the next episode.